Hey everybody. So my name is Frank Rosario, and I'm an artist, and I work mostly using wood and metal. Um, I make sculpture. Here in my shop in North Brentwood, we have a space here. Along with my partner, Katie, have a warehouse here in North Brentwood, and she does ceramics, and I do the wood and metal stuff. Um, a little bit about before I did this, I was a photographer. I was a working photographer for about 15 years, and I shot a lot of music photography, mostly in the 90s, which was a long time ago. And after I did that, then I started doing some printmaking, and I was really drawn to woodcut, like the material using wood. That sort of expanded to trying to figure out other ways to use wood. I was lucky enough to attend a couple of craft schools, Penland and Haystack and Anderson Ranch up in Colorado, where I did a furniture making workshops. And just learning more about the material and what I could do with it. I did some furniture making. And then that just sort of, I guess my attention moved more towards abstraction. So now I think the work I do is, I guess, sort of abstract, and I use geometry in my work a lot. And I'll walk around the space and I'll show you some stuff. You guys, I'm sure, have seen some of this stuff, some of you, but anyway, I want to see if I can show you around. Can you guys see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So, so this is our space, and this is the wood shop. So here I have different kinds of woodworking projects going. Sometimes I do, I guess more utilitarian work. I make tables and benches and chairs and that kind of thing. But I also like to do sculpture. So I'll show you some of that in here. I'll start over here. These are skateboards that a friend of mine gifted me. He's a skateboarder, and he goes through a lot of boards, looks like. So all these are his broken boards. When he breaks them, he saves them, and then he gave them to me. So we sort of prepped them, took all the decals. There's a bunch of stickers and the grippy tape. Took all those adhesives off, and then we cut them down. These were broken. We cut them down to smaller pieces, and then put glue in there and smash them together. And then you get something sort of like this.
So what you're doing is you're taking skateboards, and those are made from wood. And so for those at home, just remember that wood comes from trees. So what's inside a tree, and so it's made into a skateboard. And you're cutting those up and gluing them together and making new shapes out of them, which is really cool because skateboards are, traditionally flat, but by stacking them on top of each other, you get a much larger, like a taller height to those. So would you say that when you are working with wood in other sculptures and what you make with those, are you usually using old materials like skateboards, or is this something new? Like, do you buy wood, or do you just use materials you find?
Well, I do both. It really depends on what the project is, sort of what's happening in my life, in terms of what I have access to, what kind of time frame I'm dealing with. Most of the time, I work from slab wood. So like behind me here, like this is a slab, and this is where somebody just took there was a tree, and they basically laid it down horizontally, and they cut slices out of the tree, and you get a slab. I don't know if you can picture it here, but This is a slab.
Like a really,
This is,
like a flat piece of wood that is just bare, and then you can cut it up how you want.
yeah, essentially it's just a slice. If you took a tree and laid it down flat and you sliced it, that's essentially what that is. And most of the time, that's what I'm using. See, like if you look over here, like these are different pieces, slab pieces that often I'll turn into furniture. You know, I have a metal shop here as well. So, you know, often I'll make metal bases, and then I'll work on the slab, and that'll be the tabletop. And that's what I do a lot of the time. Here's some more slabs here. This one is probably about, the walnut one, the tallest one, is probably about 12 feet. So it's pretty tall. And what I do
Like
with those,
two basketball players stacked together.
yeah, that's about right. It's very high. And what I'll do with those actually is I'll cut that down into squares. So from that big piece, I'll slice out smaller squares out of it. And with those, I actually cut circles out of it. So I cut that big piece into probably about 10 different squares. And then I'll take those squares and I'll cut those into circles. And then I'll end up with something sort of like this. And then I'll take this piece when it's still a square, and I'll go over here, and I'll take it to my lathe, and then I'll turn it. And then, you know, this thing, whoa, what happened? Okay. That thing, it spins, and I make platters, or, you know, different kinds of sort of round objects with them. Here's some more of those.
So the wood gets spun around, and then you cut into the wood in order to make it in the shape you want.
Exactly. I could, if we have time, I can actually show you, because my lathe is here. But see, this would go on here, and then that goes there, and then it spins. And then I'll use these tools, you know, gouges. I have a bunch of different tools in the drawer there. See, this thing will start spinning. And,
so it spins while you cut it, and you use the metal tool to cut into that.
Exactly. And like, I mean, those are kind of, you know, the platters are less fun, but one of the more fun things I can make out of these is tops. I've been experimenting. I like to, you know, sort of like, you know, it's sort of like, you know, play games, and when I can make toys, I'll make toys. I have a couple of them over here. These are tops that I made using the same process, using the lathe. So, you know, like these guys, let's see if I can get one to spin. Hold on.
Fabulous.
So I can take, you know, these kinds of, you know, these start from pieces, chunks of wood that look more like this.
So you can just take that piece of wood and turn it into a brand new toy.
Yeah, picture. So, you know, so there's the big piece. I can cut a slice out of it, you know, and then I'll take it over here and put it on the lathe, and then, you know, spin it, and then I'll cut it into the shape of a top.
I think we have someone at home who also has some tops too, some toys. Awesome, very cool. So that's how you make those, which is really cool. And I'm sure that you use different tools for working with metal than with wood. So real quick, let me share my screen, because I've got some pictures of your work that you sent me. So for everyone to see at home, here are, let me spotlight that. Okay. So now everyone can see, hopefully, some sculptures that you've made from metal. So you're working with wood and you're using tools to carve and to basically take away from the wood to make things smaller. But here we have metal where you're creating shapes. So, you know, with wood, obviously you're creating shapes, you're cutting out shapes, you're carving shapes. But the shapes that you get in metal, like here, the triangles here, it's you know, it's already hard to comprehend cutting into wood. I think if you've never done it before for kids at home. So cutting into wood, you can do, it's a hard material, but if you have something sharp enough, you can cut into it. But metal is harder. It's a harder material in a lot of cases. So what kind of tools are you using to create these metal pieces?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. So with the metal, you know, it's a lot harder. Like you said, it's a harder material. So with the metal, I can sort of bend it, but a lot of times what I like to do is I melt it. So to melt metal, you know, I do welding. I use different kinds of welding, and things get really hot. You know, like maybe this is hard. So, like, you know, to melt the metal, I get up to around, you know, over 2,000 degrees with welding.
And for those at home, if you think about, like, you put a metal baking sheet in the oven to make cookies, and you set your oven temperature to about maybe 425 degrees. I don't think my oven gets above 500 degrees. So if you do some math, now 2,000 is more than double. That's quadruple, I think, if I'm getting my math right. That's quadruple how hot your oven is at home. So there's a reason why the metal doesn't melt when you stick it in the oven. Other things will melt, of course. If you accidentally have put a plastic plate in the oven, it would melt. For metal, it's got to be super, super hot. And so what happens when metal melts? It's a solid, but what does it become after it gets that hot?
That's super interesting, like the way you describe it. I mean, because if the oven were to heat up to 2,000 degrees, the oven would melt.
Yes.
Because it's made of metal. So the oven would just become a puddle. Okay, so I can show you, I can show you that piece.
Okay.
In the photo.
And while we're looking at that, just imagine, for those at home, imagine when you light a candle, the fire from the candle melts the candle and it moves down and it slowly melts into a puddle. That happens to the metal too when it's super, super hot.
Yeah, so here's that piece from one of the photos, from the first photo. And this piece started, and it's similar to the wood, because I guess I'm using material that isn't, the wood is sort of, I guess, the material in its sort of raw form. When I do welding, I do a couple of different kinds of welding. My favorite is called TIG, T-I-G, TIG welding. And for that, I use this metal rod here. This is sort of like a piece of metal wire. It's kind of orange. It looks like copper. And it has a copper, like the pipes in your house that have water moving through them.
Or pennies.
Copper.
Pennies are copper too.
Pennies are copper too. So this is actually steel, but has a copper sort of layer, a very thin copper layer around it. And this is what I use. I melt these pieces into the pieces that I'm trying to join together. So, like, for example, like here's a piece, and these edges here are where I put two pieces of metal together, and then I melted the seam so that they stick. And then this rod is what I use while it's melting to push in there to kind of like the glue. So picture sort of like, I don't know if you guys know, like a glue gun or a hot glue gun would squish glue into the two things that you're trying to join. For metal, I use this rod to do that. But for those pieces, what I'm actually joining is the rod. So I'll take a bunch of this, a bunch of these pieces. This is all welding rod. I take a bunch of these and I decide what shapes I want to work with. And usually I like to make sort of shapes that repeat. I like to use the same shape over and over again. So for those, I might start like with a triangle. So I'll take, you know, like these, for example. I'll put them together like this, and then I'll weld. You know, I'll use my welding torch, this little thing here, and I'll zap it, and it looks like lightning that comes out of the tip. And you have to wear a special, you know, a special helmet to protect your eyes and to protect your skin. And then I'll shoot a little piece of lightning in there, and then it'll melt those corners, and then I'll get that.
So they'll stick together.
And then they'll stick together.
I think it's really cool that you're working with those patterns of the same shapes. So that's something for those at home. When you use the same pattern over and over, that can be called a pattern. If sometimes if you do, let's say, triangle, 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 that's a pattern. But if you also do square, rectangle, square, rectangle, that's also a pattern. And I can see lots of patterns in the works that you're doing where you're drawing shapes almost in the air, which is what we call 3D. So when you draw a square on a piece of paper, imagine if those lines came to life and were right in front of you. And I think this is a really cool thing to try at home, not with metal, but for those who are interested, if you take pretzel sticks, little pretzel rods, and you use royal icing, your parents can help you make royal icing at home. If you can dip the pretzel rods in the royal icing and stick them together and make some of these shapes at home too.
Totally, totally. And I mean, sometimes what I'll use is like skewers, like wooden skewers. When I first want to, let's say I'm not ready to weld a shape, but I just kind of want to try and see sort of how the pieces fit together. I'll take skewers, which are just like really long toothpicks, and I'll use a hot glue gun and just kind of start sticking pieces together, which is very similar. It's not as strong as metal, but it's a good way for me to get an idea of where that piece, if it's going to work.
But if you use pretzels, if you used pretzels, you'd have a snack after you're done.
And that's even better. Oh my gosh. That sounds fantastic. So yeah, it's patterns. So I'll use, you know, let's say for this one, triangles, and then I'll start putting triangles together. And you know, if you look at it like this, see, it looks kind of flat, but I skewed one of the pieces so it has depth. So now, you know,
it's two triangles stuck together. Very cool.
Exactly. And it's kind of like, you know, it looks like the mountains. And then I take a bunch of those and I just start composing them into something that makes sense to me. And then there's one of the photos, there's a big piece on the other side of the room, way down there, that I made with the triangles. This piece here, very similar, except this is made from rectangles. So I start with, you know, essentially this shape. So I start essentially with a rectangle, start welding the pieces together. And with this one, and I got a lot going on my table, but with this one, I just took that rectangle shape as a starting point, and then did one that way. I turned it, and I just kept doing that, and then I joined them together from the corners. And see, eventually, it's hard to see, but eventually, see, I get that. And a lot of times, like when I I mean, pretty much all the time when I'm working, I always listen to music. And the kind of music I listen to, a lot of music, it's patterns, it's repetition. It's sort of like, sort of a same, an order of things happening over and over again. And I think a lot of times for me, those patterns that are happening in the music somehow translate, into something like this, where like the spaces in between sounds are shorter or longer, or more full, or more flat. The music that I listen to me is very inspiring. And, it's sort of like, I think, for me, I think, like I'm taking something that, can be sort of chaotic, there's a lot happening, and I try to sort of create some order out of it.
Through the patterns. Yeah, and I think, for those at home who maybe aren't recognizing patterns in the music they listen to, next time you hear one of your favorite songs, think about how many times you hear the chorus, the main part of the song, and what happens in between. Or think about the drum beats too. So, if you have a drum beat that goes like 1, 2, 1, 2, that's a pattern. So I really see that in your work. I think I can imagine you listening to music in the studio and making things that respond to that. So I encourage everyone at home to try making artwork to music too. I think it's a great way to discover some really cool patterns.
Yeah, the drum patterns are really important. And that's a really good way to sort of, make the connection between sort of where it starts and stops, but sometimes, like a lot of times, like those start from straight pieces. All the pieces are straight, and I'm putting them into sort of like they're straight angles. Sorry, what'd I do? Did I do something?
No, you're good.
Okay. And then it's funny because other times the pieces are they have more curves, like this. And then I think to me the curves are sort of like more like the melody. And then these pieces, what I really like about them too is they kind of move, and, and it's like when I look at them, I can almost hear them, and I can hear the melody changing. And it's sort of a big part of the way I work, is what I'm listening to.
It almost
and
looks
it's
like
funny.
you're dancing.
It does.
Yeah.
And it's funny, like you can actually, like, some of these I can run pieces of metal along them, or I can hit them, and they do make sound.
Oh, cool.
But they're almost like musical instruments.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, real quick, we're almost out of time, but I want to make sure that we have, I let people know if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat. I just want to make sure that everyone knows that this is your chance to ask Frank a question here. But while people are thinking, I would love to know, what are you working on? Like, do you have anything that you're excited that's not finished yet, that you're exploring now?
Right now, it's kind of a strange time because things are sort of on pause for us.
Right.
Here in the space. We were starting to have classes here in our studio, but we had to sort of, pause all that stuff. So we're really just using the time. I'm using this time mostly just to experiment. So, and then the idea is maybe, to sort of scale up some of these metal pieces that I'm working on. So right now, I mean, it's really just a time for discovery. I'm using this opportunity to sort of try to work out some ideas that have maybe been floating around in there. And I just haven't, we're usually so busy that I haven't had a chance to work on.
Right.
So lots of different things happening. My partner, she's here, and she's, we try to collaborate. She, like I said, she does ceramics, so she's like always working on, the wheel and sort of making shapes there. And One of the things that we're excited about working on is we want to do some mobiles, some sort of, you know, pieces that hang from the ceiling.
Mm.
So I'm working on, I can show you over here, like above my space. I don't know if you can see it.
Yes, the hanging metal, very cool.
But this is like the hanging piece, and then it's on a hook there, and I lower it, and then just sort of playing with if we're gonna put some ceramic shapes, you know, if we're gonna hang some ceramic shapes on it, or some of my metal pieces, or some wooden pieces. So that's something we're working on together. It's nice, you know, because in our space here we have so much, I guess, vertical space up there. There's, you know, a lot of space up there. I've never had so much space to work in. So we can hang things from the ceiling and sort of see what we respond to.
Yeah, and for those who are maybe trying to take some inspiration from Frank at home and make some other art projects, you can also create hanging pieces using pipe cleaners. So pipe cleaners are really fuzzy and they have a metal inside, and the metal's so thin and soft that you can bend it. You don't need the very fancy high temperature zapper that you've got over there. to heat the metal up so that you can bend it. But you can try bending your pipe cleaners in all sorts of shapes just by moving your hands and turning that around. You can try wrapping one around another, and maybe try then holding that from a string and see if you can create something similar. I think it's really cool to think about artwork that isn't just on a paper and on a page that goes up on the wall, but things that you can walk around, that you can walk under. So that's a very exciting opportunity to be thinking about things that you're hanging from the ceiling.
Yep.
Well, great. All right, so we are at 1:30. We have, thank you, Frank, for Mandy. This was so cool. We're so happy that you could join us today.